Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Coachman. For today's story, I'm going to be going to, I believe, a new country that I have not read from before, but I haven't read before, but it's a new region, which is Slovenia, and this story is called is actually cool because it's called Children and Old Folk, and I think you're gonna find I think for many of us who are not kids, who are old folks, that I think we forget sometimes that these two demographics, they're a lot more alike than they are different. So with that being said, let's get into it. And this is a lovely story by Ivan Cankar, who apparently is like like the godfather of Slovenian literature, which I was really surprised to see. But a lot of his work it often told about like the times, which was, I would say, somewhat like bleak and like poor. But with that being said, let's get into the story, and I hope you enjoy. Each night before they went to bed, the children used to chat together, seating themselves on the ledge of the broad oven. They uttered whatever came into their minds. Through the dim window, the evening twilight peered into the room with dreamy laden eyes. Out of every corner, the silent shadows drifted upwards, carrying straight stories with them. They spoke of whatever came to their minds, but to their minds came only pleasant stories of sunlight and warmth interwoven with love and hope. The whole future was one long bright holiday. No Lent between Christmas and Eastertide. Over there, somewhere behind the flowery curtain, all life blinking and throbbing, silently poured from the light into light. Words were whispered and only half understood. No story had any beginning, not definite form. No story had an end. At times, all four children spoke at once, yet none confused the other. All gazed enthralled into a Beatrice heavenly light, where each word was clearly and true, where each story had a clear and living face, and each tale its glorious finish. The children bore the children bore so marked a resemblance to one another that in dim twilight the face of the youngest, 4-year-old Tunchuk, could not be distinguished from that of 10-year-old Loitska, the eldest. All had thin, narrow faces and large, wide open eyes, introspective eyes. That evening, something unknown from an unknown place reached with violent hand into the heavenly light and struck pitiless oui, oh, among the holidays and stories and legends. The post had brought tidings that the father had fallen on Italian soil. Something unknown, new, strange, entirely incomprehensible, rose before them. It stood there, still and broad, but had neither face nor eyes nor mouth. Nowhere did it belong, not to that clamorous life before the church and on the street, nor to that warm twilight around the oven, nor to the stories. It was nothing joyful, but neither was it particularly sorrowful, for it was dead, because it had no eyes, that it might by their look reveal wherefore and whence, and no mouth that it might explain by words. Thought stood humbly and timidly before that enormous apparition, as before a great black wall, motionless. It approached the wall and stared dumb and ponderous. But when will he come back? Asked Tonchek wonderingly. Loitka nudged him with an angry look. How can he come back if he has fallen? All lapsed in silence. They stood before that great black wall, and beyond it they could not see. I'm going to war too, unexpectedly announced 7-year-old Matic. as if he had swiftly hit up the right thought. That was evidently all that it was necessary to say. "You're too small," admonished 4-year-old Tonchak in a deep voice. Tonchak still wore dresses. Milka, the thinnest and silkiest of them, who was wrapped in her mother's large shawl and resembled a wayfarer's pack, asked in her soft little voice from somewhere out of the shadows, "What is war like? Tell us, Matic. Tell us that story." Matic explained, "Well, war is like this. People stab each other with knives, cut each other down with swords, and shoot each other with guns. The more you stab and cut down, the better it is. Nobody says anything to you, 'cause that's how it is to be. That's war." "But why do they stab and cut each other down?" Milka insisted. "For the emperor," said Matic. And all were silent. In the dim distance, before their clouded eyes, appeared something mighty, glistening with the radiance of glory. They sat motionless, their breath, bare, their breath barely during to escape their mouths, as in church at the benediction. Then Matic again swiftly gathered his thoughts, possibly just to dispel the silence which lay so heavy over them. "I'm going to war too, against the enemy." "What is the enemy like? Has he horns?" suddenly inquired the thin voice of Milka. "Course he has, else how would he be the enemy?" Seriously, almost angrily, replied Tonchak in empathetic tones. And now, not even Matches himself knew the correct answer. "I don't think he has them," he said slowly, haltingly. "How can he have horns? He's a person like us," voiced Loitska, unwillingly. Then, reconsidering, she said, "Only he has no soul?" After a lengthy pause, Tunchak inquired, "But how did the person fall in the war?" "Like this, backward," and he illustrated the point. "They kill him to death," calmly explained Matic. "Father promised to bring me a gun." "How can he bring you a gun if he has fallen?" Loitska roughly retorted. "And they killed him? To death?" "To death." Through the youthful and wide open eyes, silence and sorrow stared into darkness, into something unknown, to heart and mind inconceivable, and grandmother. The last red rays of the sun glowed through the dark foliage in the garden. The evening was silent except for a smothered, prolonged sob, already grown house, which came from the stable. In all probability, it was the wall of the young mother who had gone there to tend the livestock. The two old people sat deeply bowed, close to one another, and held each other's hands as they had not done for a long time. They gazed into the heavenly afterglow with eyes devoid of tears and did not speak. So, as you can see, honestly, I think the reason I honestly enjoyed this story is just it's wild how the young still will weave their way through like a death. But although it's different, like if you watched how the kids they were talking about like the before, the after, discussing it and everything. But like a lot of times in grown-ups, like if you saw how the grandmother and the wife they just kind of sat there and just kind of were going through it together. The kids were kind of going through it together in their own way. So you see how like it's kind of different. It's very I don't know, and I think that like a lot of times, for me, one of the biggest, I would say one of the biggest things that I realized, working in childcare for over 30 years, is that children and old people are still the ones that are most overlooked. Like we're so, society still valued like productivity, over the gentleness and the frailty and the naivety and the innocence of the young and the elderly. And I don't know. I just think that I think that it's just one of those things that this story just kind of reminds me that weakness and wisdom are not opposites. You know what I mean? That sometimes they sit in the same chair. So even if like when we look at kids, there's a lot of wisdoms in kids, even if they don't know it, because kids just say what they're looking at. And it sound a lot of times it sounds so simple, but yet it is. It's the right thing. It's right there in front of you. The same way when you look at like a lot of old people, sometimes like I said, like I'll tell you this, yeah. Like I remember my grandmother told me the greatest advice she ever gave me. She said, "Boy, she's like you are your own worst enemy." Think about it. You are your own worst enemy. 6 words, but yet to this very day, I believe it through and through. I see it every single day, and it's so simple, but yet it just stands there. You know what I mean? So I think that like with that being said, I was like, yes, like we just need to remember that like when we're watching the young, when we're listening to the elderly, like we're not, even though you're looking at something different, they're not too far off. So I hope you enjoyed this story. Let me know what you think about it, and then until next time, take care.